Come on, my dear students, shall we go into the next portion? The next portion, anti-colonial movements in Africa. Anti-colonial movements in Africa. Colonization of Africa. First of all, we should knowing about the colonization of Africa. The African coastline had been explored. Explored mean invention or discovery. Explored in the 16th century, and a few European settlements had come about. But the interior of Africa was unknown to the outside world until the last quarter of the 19th century. European colonization began after about 1875. The Berlin Colonial Conference of 1884-85 resolved that Africa should be divided into sphere of influences of various colonial powers. The war between the British and the Boers in South Africa, however, was the defiance of its resolution. Here, Boers refers the native people of Africa. Boers War. The Boers War held between the native people of Africa and the British Army. Okay. Boer Wars. The relations between the two British colonial of Natal and Cape Colony. Natal and Cape Colony was a province of Africa. Colony and the two independent Boer states of the Transvaal and the Orange Free States had long been unfriendly. The discovery of gold in Transvaal in 1886. The discovery of gold in Transvaal in 1886 led to the large number of British miners settling in on around Johannesburg. The Boers hated these people, whom they referred to as Whitelanders. Whitelander means foreigners. The Boers taxed them heavily, apart from denying political rights. So the question was whether the British or the Boers were to be supreme in South Africa. That tendency led to the Boer War. Fearing attacks from the British, the Boers armed themselves and decided to attack the British. The Boer War lasted for 3 years, 1899 to 1902. Initially, the Boers, native of the Africans, the Boers were successful, but by the first half of the 1900, the Boers army was defeated. Pretoria was occupied. The Boers took to guerrilla fighting against the British. This continued for about 2 years, the guerrilla attack. In relations, the British destroyed farms and crops of the Boers. They set up internment camps for Boers, women and children. Shortage of food, medical and sanitary facilities caused the death of the 26,000 people lost their life. The British annexed the two Boer states. Boyer's War, however, promised self-government in due course. In 1907, full responsible government was given to the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. The four states formed into the Union. The South African Act passed by the British Parliament in 1909 provided for the Union Parliament at Cape Town. The Union of South Africa came into being in May 1910. And then nationalist politics in South Africa. Nationalist politics. There were two main political parties. The Unionist Party, which was mainly British. The Unionist Party, which was mainly in British. And the South African Party, which had largely Afrikaners, Boers. The first Prime Minister, Botha, belonged to the South Africa. The first Prime Minister, Botha, belonged to the South Africa Party, ruled in cooperation with the British. But a militant section of the South African Party formed the National Party under Hertzog. Hertzog wanted a twin policy of supremacy of white over black and Afrikaners over British. In 1920, the elections, the National Party gained 44 seats. The South African Party, now led by Smuts, secured 41 seats. At this juncture, the British dominated Union Party merged with the South African Party. This gave Smuts a majority over the militant Afrikaners controlled National Party. Nextly, racist policy against the blacks. The Afrikaners pursued a harsher racist policy towards the blacks and the minority Indians. In 1923, an act was passed to come the native resident to certain parts of towns. Already, an act of 1930 had segregated blacks and white farmers. Segregated means divided. Which made it impossible for the blacks to acquire land in most parts of the country. In the 1924 elections were won by the National Party with the support of the labor movement, composed mainly of white miners. The act passed in 1924 prevented blacks from striking work, from joining trade unions. In the Cape province, the voting right to blacks was abolished. In the Cape province, the voting right to black was abolished. Native blacks suffered in all spheres, social, economic, and politics. Nextly, dominion status for South Africa. South Africa had gained dominion status and thus had full control over foreign policy. The World Economic Depression brought unemployment and bankruptcy in Africa. Labour withdrew its support given to the National Party. Smuts believed that a coalition government was required to solve the country's economic problems. Therefore, the South African Party and the National Party united in 1934 to form the United South African National Party or United Party for short. In spite of misunderstandings and disagreements, the Smets-Herzog alliance lasted until 1939. Lastly, South Africa during the World War and its aftermath. When the World War II broke out, the United Party split on the issue of South Africa support for Britain in the war against Germany. Smets opposed Nazism and wanted South Africa to help Britain, but Herzog was sympathetic towards Hitler and favored a policy of neutrality. The parliament, however, decided in favor of war. The Herzog resigned. Smets continued to function as the Prime Minister until 1948, with the passing away of Herzog. Many in the party led by him joined the nationalists. The 1948 election gave the reunified National Party a majority over the truncated party. Okay, students. Lastly, we should know about the apartheid policy. Okay. Apartheid means discrimination of color. Discrimination of color based, which means separateness shortly, became the racial policy of the Nationalist Party in 1947. From 1950 onwards, a series of laws came to be enforced. The whole country was divided into separate areas for the different races. Marriage between white and non-white was forbidden. Nearly all schools were brought under the government control, so that education different from that of the whites could be implemented for Africans. University education was also segregated. Apartheid is based on the belief that the political equality of white and black in South Africa would mean bloc rule. Since this would imperil the European interests, it was decided to keep the Africans in permanent subjections through forces. Warwood, who was Prime Minister of South Africa from 1958 to 1966, he was the brain behind the apartheid policy. From 1958 to 1966 was the brain behind of apartheid policy in South Africa. The African National Congress, founded in 1912, fought the practice of racism. Repression was let loose against the leaders of the Congress. The African National Congress was banned and its leader Nelson Mandela was put behind the bars. Mounting pressures at the global level helped to end the racist regime in South Africa. In 1990, the ban on African National Congress was lifted and Mandela freed after 27 years. In the elections held subsequently, The Africans were allowed to vote, and the African National Congress won the elections, and Mandela became the first black president of South Africa. Even though apartheid was dismantled, the whites completely dominate the economic spheres. Okay, students, we will meet the next session. Thank you.